The Digital Circles Podcast, giving a voice to Northern Ireland's business network. Brought to you by Private Label People. With your host, Paul Mooney.
Robert, tell us why we're here.
We are here today, Paul, to record an opening episode about small businesses and about a small business podcast.
Yeah, I think you've said it well. It's something that we had these sort of conversations going back some time ago, and we've probably had a wee bit of time to think ourselves recently about really small businesses that are out there, what there is for them, how we found it, because we've both had small businesses. You've had a larger scale business because you grew into that, and try and help people, which would be great.
Yeah, you know, you've had a number of businesses who've been involved in small businesses where, you know, we've either worked in small businesses or we've had those types of business. And yeah, I think whenever you're talking there about like helping them, that's exactly where we wanted to go, and having the ideas to do this for a number of years, and then recently saying, what are we waiting on? Why are we waiting? Let's just turn the microphones on, start talking about it, bring in guests from these businesses or these businesses types, and yeah, just go for it. Stop. What are you waiting on, guys? And I think we're almost waiting on permission from some mythical being, and we decided the other day that mythical being has granted us access and permission to go and do it, Paul.
No more procrastinating. Yeah, I think it's funny actually, because I mentioned this to somebody the other day, and I'd mentioned we'd had this idea, and they said, but can you make money out of helping people? And I'm like, well, if you go to the doctor, he gets paid for, you know, seeing you. If you go to a solicitor, they're helping you, but they're getting paid to
some
help
more
you.
than others.
Yeah. So it's funny that it's like people go, well, why are you trying to help people, but it's going to be a business? But it sort of stems back to me from whenever I had a small business. Now, don't get me wrong, there is some support out there, and there's different commerce groups you can go to, and you can sit down with like-minded people. But they're, for me, a certain type of group, whereas I think what I would like to do and what you would like to do is bring sort of cutting-edge, innovative ideas to people, but let them have their own time to work on their business, but be able to check in every day and look at a group, for instance, that we might start and say, okay, what's new on here today? Let's see what these guys have said. Let's see what this business owner's doing, and really have an eye on business at all times in the local community. And I think that's
yeah,
good.
and you mentioned something there, you know, about, you know, say chambers of commerce and different things like that. And we're not saying don't go there, but what we're definitely saying is go there for a specific aim, and always have your eyes and ears more so open to other avenues of assistance or support or help, or, you know, having a look at innovation and all of these different things. Always be on the outlook. It's like I have this thing of inside our businesses for a while, like always be researching. Well, the same thing kind of applies. Always be on the lookout, because chambers of commerce and different things like that, look, at the end of the day, they're governmental, right? There is an awful lot, which is a real paradox. There's an awful lot of people there who are promoting those things and doing those things who have never had a business, right? So that's kind of like the paradox. They're in that government end, and governments have to do things for small businesses because small businesses pay their wages technically. You know, small businesses generate VAT bills, they generate tax bills, they generate employment. So governments have to do these things, and they have to put the money in, because they're putting the money down to get more back. Don't believe that it's anything other than that. But there is avenues that you can go down for funding and grants and this, that and the other. This is something completely different. And to pick up on a point that you said as well, it's like, this is almost like a vocation as well, because we want to be able to help in a fun, social, sort of societal kind of way. It doesn't always have to revolve around do, re, mi or dosh.
No, of course not. And I think that's the other thing. It's people out there when you run a small business, and this is predominantly small businesses we're talking about, they need to interact with one another, but they're almost a little bit wary of it. I mean, when you run a small business, I lost track of the amount of times in the industry that I worked in where you talk to someone about your business and they would have asked you how things are going. You would have said, well, okay, but you never got too much into detail, and neither did they. It was sort of like there was always an elephant in the room, or they were a competitor in some ways, but there's so much more that we can help with in terms of just introducing people to one another and getting them to talk about, look, you might have an employee, you might only need them 3 days a week. Could you take them 2 days a week? It's things like that, little wins that can come off the back of talking to one another, instead of going, well, I don't want to say that I only need my employee 3 days a week because that's a sign of failure. And it's actually not, because if you can get them, a little bit of help getting another position, it gets you a little bit of help that way, get someone else a little bit of help. I mean, it puts you back into a stronger position. Do you think we're just a bit closeted, aren't we, in Northern Ireland?
I think that's definitely Northern Ireland, but also I think the world over. And it's exactly what you've been talking about there, because I do feel that because people tend to only speak to people in their own industry, I think that's the stem of where it comes from. Whereas if you had a coffee shop owner who was talking to a butcher or, a framing company for like picture framing, or an upholsterer or whatever else, or maybe somebody completely different in, like, say, the digital media space or something like that, all of a sudden their guard will come down a little bit. They'll start to tell them about their business, where they're doing well, where they're not doing so well, where they need some assistance. Whereas, as you were saying, if you're speaking to somebody in the same industry, it tends to be this thing of everything's fine, everything's great, I'm wonderful, I'm not going to say anything so that you don't think anything, and the two parties are very closed. I think we could definitely drop that guard a little bit whenever we are speaking to competitors and make it more about a collective, like you were talking about, sharing different things, sharing ideas, but also then getting the practice of that by speaking and conversing and opening our eyes and ears to other industries and seeing what they're doing right that could be synthesized into ours.
Yeah, and there's some great businesses out there. There's a lot of guys doing really well, comes very naturally to them, but I think one thing in common is most people have struggled at some point in business. They've had something that hasn't worked, or very, very rarely are you talking to somebody in business and they say, oh, it just went brilliant from day one. It's funny, people open up a little bit more as they're successful as their failures, but at the start they don't say, oh, I'm struggling here, I could do with a bit of support. It's usually whenever they get higher up the chain, they go, oh, I remember 2 years in and I was... Again,
paradoxical, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think business, like any sort of business, especially the startup and especially the small, is going to have that roller coaster ride in a good way. And it comes in waves. You don't get like the straight up growth. You get a little bit up and then something comes along and hits you back down. And that, I think that makes you stronger. And then whenever you do get that success, that's whenever most people kind of open up. But if they'd opened up before that, maybe they'd have had, it would have made more people get the success. Because I think if we look back in terms of like our business relationship, that's where I feel that it kind of started was, you were going through some challenges in the business, or maybe it was more so unknowns. Mm-hmm. It's like, what can I do here, or what could we do? And I was not in your industry. I was in a different industry. And being able to sit down and talk about it and open up the jacket, so to speak, and show all the different things that you could do, and then you be able to, because you knew your industry, you could then cherry pick and say, well, actually that's a good idea, that might work. I'm not sure about that one because that doesn't fit in with our customer or the way that our customers like to interact. Or, oh, well, we can maybe try that one. That's not something that's been done before, but it might fit in. We could test it. And I think that's where it kind of came around from. And then putting that in was what we want to talk to other business owners on this podcast and identify certain areas or maybe give them some assistance or open that conversation up to other ways of doing things.
Yeah, it's just like you said there. It's people tend to talk to people within their own industry. And if you talk to people outside of that industry, you will get so much more in terms of, you know, how they did things and, you know, different ideas. And you might turn around and say, well, no, look, I know my industry and that wouldn't quite work in there. You could be wrong on that, by the way. That might just be preconceived judgment of where you're at, and maybe you should do it the other way.
Well, we know somebody who will not mention the name right now, but maybe people will work it out. And we've been speaking to him where they took an industry that couldn't be done, right? They said, "Oh, that won't work," and they took that industry and they actually did that thing and became extremely successful. So, you know, they took, again, I'll not mention the industry, but they took something that every single person says that cannot be done online. There is no way that can be done online. And they took it online, and it's parabolic at this stage.
Yeah. I also think there's lots of characters within our local industry. I mean, I've worked for a few, but there are some.
You are one.
Absolutely. I think there might be a few listeners will attest to that eventually. But we've got some people that live. I mean, we're in a town here. I don't know how many people live in this place.
A couple of thousand, probably.
A couple of thousand, but it would surprise you. There's maybe 20 businesses within this town, but yet out of those 2,000 people, they probably aren't on first name terms with, maybe there maybe be a handful that are on first name terms with the local butcher or with the local shopkeeper. But that's about it. There's so many more people just go in, buy something, go out again, or maybe never go into that shop. Whereas I think what we would really like to do is sort of try and celebrate the people within your own community that run businesses. And also there's a lot of people out there don't realise how difficult it is to run a small business and why they should support a small business. And if you can go in and do that, and it makes, you can see small business owners are really happy to meet their local clientele, if you like, because...
Yeah, I love everything around that idea because, if we get ourselves away from the major cities, and I think this goes across all different countries as well. Once you remove yourself from the big cities, countries aren't that different, and if you could maybe take where we are and say Scotland, and there's a lot of affinity there and a lot of connection, but you get yourself away from Glasgow and Edinburgh and you go into some of the smaller towns. They're very, very similar to where we are, and I love that idea of the local industry and people keeping their spendable income, their disposable income in the town or in the village, and the closer you keep it, then it's better. It's much better to give your money and buy your produce from the local, say, butcher than the big supermarket chain that's 20 miles away. You're not. That's kind of what we want, and that whole idea of the local shopkeeper knowing the more and more people knowing the local shopkeeper. I think that's absolutely great, and that's kind of part of the byproduct I think we get from having these open conversations, allowing people to understand what we know that could potentially help them achieve more and more of that.
Yeah. And it's the oldest sales line is people buy off people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, if you're willing to put yourself out there, maybe do a podcast, something like that, come in and speak to us, and all of a sudden people in your local community, they realise, well, I never really went into that shop before. Seems like a good character. Wouldn't mind now.
Yeah.
The flip side to might say, I am never going to that shop.
Well, it's
we'll run the risk.
It's things like that of, trying something new. Many times, like if you're listening to this, like you're probably thinking, I'm never going to do a pod. What would I have to speak about? And you would be really, really surprised. I think what people would be saying is, no, I'm not going to try anything new. And the vast majority will do that. Be the outlier. Be the the 20% or the 1 in 10 or whatever. I know, by the way, that 1 in 10 is not 20%, by the way, but I was going with the 80-20 rule or the 1 in 10. But be the outlier, right? And it's like you just never know. And as you say, Paul, like the characters or the little things. I remember we were speaking with somebody down the country in a place. I won't name the industry, but it was a very older style of industry, and like you would wonder like why you would want to be in a pub. But that's the kind of person that I want on, because he was a character.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeez, you come across him constantly, and
we want to come across more.
Yeah, totally. So people should get in touch and get on it with us, because it's going to be. I think it's going to be a good ride. It's going to be fun. It's going to help a lot of people, and I think we'll gain a lot from it in terms of just
I think everybody. Yeah, I think everybody will. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to, interviewing people, so to speak, or having a bit of fun on a podcast, talking about their business, talking about what they know, introducing them to maybe what they don't know, seeing them trying out different things inside the business, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, helping them out, giving the assistance, pointing them in the right direction, and then having them back onto the podcast talking about how well their growth is happening, both month on month and year on year, Paul.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. I think you can go to a lot of networking events, and one of the things I struggle with networking events, you're going to laugh here, I'm going to say this, but I'm naturally quite shy. Our sound recorder guy nearly fell off his seat, as did you.
I think that's the end of I think that's definitely the end of everything here. Oh look, there's a pig in the sky.
But when I go into those scenarios, I don't particularly enjoy going up to people.
I think it's because it's false. Whenever you say about being shy, but whenever it's not false, you're not shy. As in, when we come into the office, we start talking. We could talk about something that you know or something that you don't know. You're not backward in that. You'll come forward with the ideas, but it's whenever everything is so false and sterile. I think everybody. I'm pretty similar to you. It's not so much that I'm shy. I'm just like oh God, I don't want to be here. This is just not me.
Whereas I think what we're doing actually will help that, because say for instance we do a networking event and we have 20 people there. If those 20 people have all been on the podcast, for instance, or even 5 of them have, it makes that person so much more familiar then that you would I want to go and speak to that guy or that girl, whatever.
Yep.
But it just opens things up a little bit and really, gets that interaction going. I think that'll really help also.
Yeah, because then you kind of know something, not just like names. It's sort of it's broken down a bit of a barrier straight away. If that person's talking about their business or something that happened or something funny, then the other person already knows a little bit more. So being able to listen to the podcasts, picking up some bits that you might want to use in your business that somebody else in a different industry is talking about or is trying out, that we're introducing them to, and then being able to speak to that person. I think those things are great, and it's, I guess you call it maybe like icebreakers or whatever, but all of a sudden people feel a hell of a lot more comfortable in that scenario, and I would feel a lot more comfortable. I think you would feel a lot more comfortable in that scenario than some sort of stiff networking event where you're forced to stand up and start talking about your business. It becomes very sterile, rigid. These are not great words whenever we're talking about events.
Yeah, never easy to do, especially at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, screw that with your bacon buddy that they've provided.
No, we've a lot of work to do. I'm going to go out onto the street and shepherd's hook somebody for a podcast interview.
Hopefully a shepherd.